I think we're just giving 1 minute for everyone to connect in before we begin. Okay, we're going to take just 1 more second, and then I think we can get started. It's good to see everyone.
Did you get your haircut?
Did.
Looks great. It looks really good. You look good. You look like you're feeling good. Are you feeling good?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm feeling good, but I'm definitely feeling a lot better. Yeah.
You're projecting like that you're feeling good anyway.
Oh, that's, you know, there's research, there's some sort of research, I can't actually cite it very well, that shows that like smiling actually helps improve your mood because it tricks your brain, right? So it's kind of that thing, like I'm getting rest, I'm getting my haircut, it helps make everything feel better.
Haircuts do a lot, actually. I'm ready. I haven't had a haircut since this whole thing started, except for the one I gave myself, which doesn't count. You know, that was chop, chop.
So, I think, do we have any more people coming in? And I'm wondering.
Good right now, Kristen, if you want to start.
Yeah, so I have to apologize. I have lost my ability to see the whole screen. I will take advice. I'm not sure what's happened.
What can you see right now?
Just a strip
of people at the top.
Of people. Yep.
So you want to hit the next to the blue arrow on the right side above it. There's, I don't know, 9 little boxes that make up a box. Do you see that?
No, that's what I've lost. I've never had that happen before. So
the far upper right?
No, it's just I am so confused. There we go. I found it.
Okay, good.
Okay, I'm Kristen Lane, and I'm one of the co-leaders of this particular session. Thanks so much, Hillary, for talking me through my technical difficulties. That may be a theme of our first session here, but hopefully not. And so thank you all. I think we have 31 participants in this call so far. More people may join us, but we have a lot that we're covering today. So let's get started. So as you probably remember, RAD's 2020 Leadership Retreat was supposed to be held in person in Wilmot, New Hampshire in June, but that was then. What we are doing now is we've reorganized the retreat into 4 strategic sessions, all of them online. And in each of these sessions over the next several weeks, we will be looking deeply into the issues of these times. And the sessions, we hope, will bring forward the necessary questions we need to consider in order to address the multiple and interlocking crises we're confronting in Vermont and in New Hampshire and more broadly. We are hoping to consider how best to use the opportunities inherent in crises to build our movement, and we will plan for the 2020 election and how we can enact a more just and equitable future. So, a lot we're trying to do. Today's session is how to turn crisis into opportunity, organizing and leading in these times. So we'll start by watching a video that was put together by People's Action called Understanding Crisis. It went up in late April, so that was before George Floyd's murder and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. We'll be adding in and reflecting on that moment as we go along with the rest of the session. Following the video, you're going to hear some brief remarks to put these crises in perspective from RAD's Executive Director, James Haslam, and founding board member and longtime movement leader, Traven Lishon, who is now a member of the Rights and Democracy Institute board. So, and then just to lead us through kind of the entire session, after their remarks, the biggest chunk of our time, we hope it will be at least an hour and a half, will be together exploring 3 questions. First in breakout sessions, and then sharing out to the whole group. 1, what big, bold ideas do we pursue? 2, how do we organize for this moment? And 3, how do we make meaning of this moment? So we'll be looking for a couple of note takers and co-facilitators for the breakout sessions. So think about whether you'd like to volunteer, and I'll be asking for you to raise your hand at the end of the comments from James and Traven. Okay, so with that, shall we go to the video?
Can everybody see that?
Yep, Fonzie, I think we can see it.
Okay, just making sure.
I'm not getting any sound.
Fonzie, is the sound, can you turn the sound on?
Oh. Oh, shit. What? There's no sound?
There's no sound on the video.
No,
Sorry.
no.
That's okay.
I don't know.
Franzi, when you share your screen, there's a checkbox at the bottom that allows you to make sure the audio is coming through as well. Like when you start to select what window you're going to share when you're doing a screen share.
Okay, let me just check that. Oh, jeez. Okay. Sorry, everyone. Let me just check that. Okay. Oh, thanks, Isaac. Sorry about that technical difficulty. Okay, let's try it again.
Okay, I still don't think we have sound, Francie.
No.
We can see the video.
Okay.
There's a fair amount of text or kind of dialogue that goes with it. While we're working on that, maybe I'll take just see if there are any people who are willing to volunteer for the co-facilitator and note-taking in the breakout sessions. Is there anyone who you can raise your hand using the reactions, or you can put something in text in the chat. We'd like to have, let's see, there are enough of us here that it'd be great to have.
Around the world and throughout the nation, we are in a moment of
Sec-
crisis.
Set.
To date, the COVID-19 virus has infected nearly 2 million people and has taken the lives of tens of thousands worldwide, with the death count growing each day. On every block, in every neighborhood, there is a shared feeling of danger as our lives and livelihoods are threatened, our sense of normalcy is destroyed, and the gravity of what's at stake weighs down on each of us. But what we may not immediately recognize is that crises present us with both grave dangers and big openings for change. The word crisis comes from the Greek word crises, which describes the turning point in a disease, when the sick person could take a turn for the better or for the worse. In moments of crisis, society stands at a crossroads, faced with different possible paths forward and needing to make a decision about which way we go. Now, many of us are probably still thinking, I hope this is over soon so things can go back to normal. But back to normal is not an option. Here's why.
Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies and to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable.
Milton Friedman was a leading force in advancing the corporate agenda that has reshaped our economy and government for the worse over the last 50 years. Friedman was wrong about a lot of things, but he was right about crises and the opportunities they create. Corporations and the politicians that serve them understand this very well, and they will use the COVID-19 crisis to reorganize society in their favor. They've done it before, and not so long ago. When the Twin Towers fell on 9/11, we felt grief, fear, and uncertainty. But a set of political and corporate leaders sensed an opportunity to grow their power and move an agenda. Before the dust had even settled, they started telling a story about protecting us from terrorism by vilifying Muslims and immigrants, and reshaped our society by dragging us in.
The sound left.
We lost the sound. Franzi?
While Franzi's working on that, I can just maybe like fill in and say, and we bought it and we said, let's protect ourselves from the Muslims. And then we were all under surveillance and all under attack. Voila.
This is really a pain in the. Ugh. Oh my God.
Fonzie, it's okay. I think we can send out the video link for people and just move forward.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. I don't know what the problem is, why it's doing that. I don't want to take up too much time.
It's all good. Great. So hey everybody, this is James.
Hey, James.
It's great to be here with all of you, and I'm super excited to start this series of strategy sessions with all of you. And thank you so much, Franz. I know this is super stressful dealing with all this technical stuff. And for folks that don't know, Kristen, Travin, and Franzi and I have been putting together this presentation, and it was the first of a lot of them. And we've had a lot on our plate, so it's been a lot of work. So thank you, Franzi, for all the work that you did helping put this together. And as Kristen said, this video we wanted to kick off with. Has not been, it was in April. So it's just incredible to think about everything that has happened from now since this video, but thinking about this strategic moment that we're in with the series of crises that we've just lived through and are living in, and all of the crisis that's coming our way. The folks preparing for the strategy retreat that was supposed to be in June, really started realizing that that we weren't going to be able to do this in person, and so we started trying to think about the series of sessions, the conversations that we wanted to have when we were in person. How to put them together to have them over a series of meetings. And the reason why we wanted to start here was because this is, we saw it as central to how all the conversations we have to have are connected. So we're going to be going deeper, from this conversation tonight in the following session. So I think everyone has gotten the invites back on. The next one is on August 29th. This idea of making meaning, we think we're going to be digging deeper into that as we dig into collective liberation and in our theory of change. And that's, and actually what we're doing throughout this whole series is really, kind of building our analysis and then being able to share stories and share analysis so that our communities can make meaning of the moment we're at. And then we will be also looking at this whole idea that was in this video and in the report we sent, and what, as Kristen said, we're going to be looking at. The other big piece is, like, how do we go bold at this moment? So we'll be talking about it tonight, but we have a whole session, the next session on September 12th, that's about the just transition to an equitable future and our work with Renew. And then also on September 12th, the next session, we'll be looking at how do we organize in this moment, looking at both, where we've been, reaching back and looking forward in a session about our organizing in this first 5 years of rights and democracy, and also specifically how do we build power coming out of the 2020 elections. So, as we think about the challenges that we're in right now, we just wanted to also recognize that this is a lot of what People's Action was in this video and in the report is very connected to the work that we've been doing. One of the other big things that they suggest is because our enemies, as Milton Friedman had laid out for the political establishment, has become so adept at using crisis as an opportunity, and Naomi Klein has captured this with the disaster capitalism and the Shock Doctrine, means that we have to be ready, not only to be able to advance our mission, but also as a form of defense, being able to go on the offense for rights and democracy, because we know they're going to be under attack. So, I was, proud looking at this section about thinking about, how all of you were nimble, in the time of crisis, by going and, doing all the mutual aid work and responding, shifting a lot of our plans. At times it really felt like, for many of us, like it was hard enough trying to figure out how to make our kids lunch while we had a meeting, but we were shifting plans by responding to the moment, also by going bold with the work that we're doing with the Just Transition and Renew, organizing in the way that we have been reaching out to unemployed folks at the beginning of this unemployment crisis, and making meaning with these series of sessions and the strategy retreat that we're doing, and in the ways we're trying to work to gather stories to move us forward. So I hope we can think of this together as as a section of getting us started in a series of strategic thinking for really the next 5 years. And we're going to talk a little bit more about these different sections that we're going to break into. But before I did that, I wanted to turn it over to Travin. Travin is someone who was a founding leader of Rights and Democracy, someone I worked with for years at the Vermont Workers Center. Has been, since I started as organizing in Vermont over 20 years ago, Travin has been someone that has been part of this movement. And he has 55 years of experience, doing transformative, revolutionary work in this country. And so we thought it'd be great to have him really provide more context to the crisis we're in. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Travin.
Thanks, James. Thanks all. I'm gathering what we have, 35 folks on tonight. Great, great for being here. And I'm looking for the slide that's come up. It should be one that says be prepared. Aha, great, okay. So financial meltdown, environmental disaster, the corona crisis, reproducing racial oppression, even the rise of Donald Trump. Neoliberalism has played its part in them all. Now, neoliberalism is not a word that's commonly used in the United States, but it's something I think RAD leaders are familiar with. And it hasn't been around forever. I mean, this is something that really kicks off in the late 1970s, and well, Milton Friedman is referred to in, and will be referred to again in this discussion as someone, they seize upon a crisis, and it's been their system ever since the late 1970s, and really once, Reagan and then Thatcher, took power, it's really been dominant across the political parties in the United States and indeed much of the world. So again and again, the left, we've been caught unprepared in moments of crisis like this moment, and we've allowed the rich and the powerful, the politicians and their servants, to take these moments to make super profits and to further consolidate the neoliberal project. So we want to here, what you see here is some recent headlines from The Guardian and in these times. And since the pandemic hit, I think most of you have a good sense of how intense and really unprecedented the attack on people's conditions and lives have been. But it's, in my understanding, something like 47 million Americans have applied for unemployment. Just some 25 million people just lost the $600 boost to unemployment benefits at the end of July. And now the Senate's going on recess until September. Well, I guess the homeless, the unhoused are lucky because it's warm out. It makes sleeping in your car more comfortable, I guess. State and local governments face unprecedented revenue shortfalls. That's true across this country, even in Vermont, where things are a little bit better. And this is indeed it's a terrible time to be governed by the callous morons that currently run this country. They've been driving runaway inequality. They brought, down on us a working crisis for an economic crisis for working Americans. So we've got unprecedented levels of unemployment, things we haven't seen since the 1930s. Food insecurity, the beginnings now, I think, of mass evictions across the country, and indeed looming economic ruin. At the same time, while many of us are facing this economic desperation, you've got something like 467 billionaires in this country who've seen their wealth go up by $730 billion just since the pandemic has begun. So when we talk about a rigged economy, that's a pretty good picture of that. Let's move on to the next one. Next slide. This is this chart here. It's from Vermont's August economic review and revenue forecast that was just provided to the governor and the legislature. And if you add up the revenue shortfall for this fiscal year, it's anticipated, revenue is anticipated to drop by $275 million and another $155 million next year. That's going to present some huge problems for our social services. Let's go on to the next slide. This is it's a slide from Naomi Klein. It's a quote from her, and you may be familiar, I think many of you are, with her work on the Shock Doctrine. It's a tactic of using the public's disorientation, facing the kind of collective shocks that we're under now, like as well as wars, coups, terrorist attacks, market crashes, natural disasters. I mean, think of a Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans or in Puerto Rico. Why don't we have someone read this, read the quote quickly, and I'm just going to say, how about Leslie? Is that fair game for you? Unmute and you
Sure.
jump and read that quote?
Sure. We know that Trump's plan is a pandemic shock doctrine featuring all the most dangerous ideas lying around, from privatizing Social Security to locking down borders, to caging even more migrants. Hell, he might even try canceling elections. But the end of this story hasn't been written yet. If there is one thing history teaches us, it's that moments of shock are profoundly volatile. We either lose a whole lot of ground, get fleeced by elites, and pay the price for decades, or we win progressive victories that seemed impossible just a few weeks earlier. This is no time to lose our nerve.
So what is she saying here? It comes down to a question of how well prepared we are to move into action quickly and effectively. As you know, as parties on the right and the former left, I mean, think of the Democratic Party, I don't know if you want to, as the former left, adopt similar neoliberal policies, they seize moments of crisis as opportunities for them to advance their radical agendas. And they are, in many ways, they're more prepared to take advantage of these openings quickly than we are. But even in the face of these kind of dangers, you know, the crises that have historically like this, they've opened up space for advances for people's movements. Left movements have succeeded. You know, this has led to crises of legitimacy. They've opened up space for profound levels of change. Let's go on to the next slide. This is a quote from Cornel West. Again, someone read this quote. Anyone want to step up? I could just arbitrarily say.
I'd step up.
Great, go for it.
The catalyst was certainly Brother George Floyd's public lynching, but the failures of the predatory capitalist economy to provide satisfaction of the basic needs of food and healthcare and quality education, jobs with a decent wage, and at the same time, the collapse of your political class, the collapse of your professional class. Their legitimacy has been radically called into question, and that's multiracial. It's the neo-fascist dimension in Trump. It's the neoliberal dimension in Biden and Obama and the Clintons and so forth. And it includes much of the media. It includes many of the professors in universities. The young people are saying, you all have been hypocritical. You haven't been concerned about our suffering, our misery, and we no longer believe in your legitimacy.
Thanks, that's great. So what are some of the possible crises of legitimacy? Trump, I guess. I mean, people think of this as just increasingly around the world as a failed state, the United States. Neoliberalism, I mean, neoliberalism is failed as a project, and in particularly, it manifests itself in terms of austerity, an anti-government agenda, which has been exposed throughout this crisis. I mean, again, it's sort of the absence of a responsible government is what got us here. And we've seen how neoliberal strategists are constructing the idea that Social Security is in crisis, and in order they've created this sense that we need to do something to save it. Obviously, you know, we've seen a response to the illegitimacy of racist policing and mass incarceration on a mass and unprecedented level in this country, and that's begun to expose racial capitalism, which is particularly for young people, I believe, perhaps a majority of young people. They see that as an illegitimate system. So this idea of using a crisis, you know, it functions differently for those of us who care about justice. You know, there's ongoing crises in oppressed communities every day: poverty, unemployment, pollution, immigration raids, police murder, etc. But for us, it's not enough to oppose a broken system. What we need is to fashion a coherent alternative and propose that in a way that's credible to people. So we've got to take crises that have been normalized and turn them into crises for the system as a whole. And we're seeing that happen today with the rapidly growing multiracial movement for Black lives. And that's turned this kind of long-standing but normalized crisis of racist police murder into a profound political and social crisis. And it's forced fundamental questions of justice that have been ignored for centuries in this country. So what we're saying here is that we need to reorient our organizing in this moment of crisis to build on the necessary short-term work of reaction and survival, but to use this moment of crisis as a chance to make what seemed politically impossible, again, into something that is politically inevitable. Let's move on to the next slide. This is the blank slide, which is there. Okay, 9/11. And boing, look, economic crisis, climate crisis, and a movement for Black lives. So, I mean, there's a multiple crises of legitimacy, and we're seeing that. People are responding. And this is a period when people in their millions are losing faith in the established system. It's a time when the people in power and their governing ideas and their political frameworks are seen as ineffective. And so they are many of us begin to see them as illegitimate. And, you know, this is happening at a time because people's lives are painfully impacted by all of these multiple crises and the failure of the response of the established order. It's recognized as inadequate. And this is, in moments like this, new political ideologies, new frameworks, new projects can gain traction. And in the right circumstances and with real organizing can come to be dominant. So, you know, if you look at the example of the financial crisis in 2008, you know, it devastated the economy, drove people from their homes, we know, it caused mass unemployment. There was an upward redistribution of wealth on a massive scale in this country. And there wasn't an immediate meaningful response on the left until really the Occupy movement comes on the scene in 2011. And if you think about how the understanding of we are the 99% and our problem is Wall Street and the 1%, how it began to change politics in a fundamental way. Let's look at the next slide, number 10, on the unemployment crisis. So again, this is taken from the August analysis of revenue and the economy in Vermont. And, you know, you don't have to read all the fine print here. What's clear is that this is unprecedented. There's nothing like it on record in terms of initial unemployment claims. I mean, the Great Recession, you know, 2008 was nothing like this. We've got a real unemployment rate nationally of something that's approaching 25%, and a real total jobless rate of something like 35 million, and it appears to still be rising. And I expect that this is going to be a long-term problem, and it raises the importance of organizing with the unemployed. Not an easy project, but an important and long-term project. Let's look at workers' movements. So when we talk about organizing people who are most impacted, in addition to the unemployed, who are working people, we're talking about working people who are forced to put their lives on the line during this crisis. And, you know, in addition to building political power for our movement, this is most potentially powerful force to counterbalance the power of organized capital. It's this class, working people, which when they get into motion can shake the foundations of capitalist society. Let's go on to the next slide on the movement for Black lives. So this is, again, I mean, we haven't seen anything like this before. In the midst of this health crisis and economic crisis, we've seen the largest social movement in the history of this country around anti-Black police violence. In June, it's estimated there were rallies in nearly 5,000 cities with some 30 million people participating. Again, unprecedented. And this has created a situation where the movement is pressing and in some cases winning demands to pass anti-racist policies. Let's move on to the next one. Bold ideas. So organizing to build a bigger we and make meaning of this. So as we've been saying, crises open windows for change, but those windows don't stay open forever. We have to respond in a quick and nimble way. Our organizations have to be able to change the focus of our work in response to the emergent crises. And remember, it's not enough to oppose a broken system. We also need to fashion a coherent alternative. We need to be able to propose that, and we have to have the organizing to make that credible. It's also important for us to understand at this moment of crisis, we have to see this in terms of a longer time horizon than usual. You know, the uprisings, if we think back to the history of the 1930s and the Great Depression then, for years, people just were demoralized. It took years, the response, the organization, the resistance, it took years to emerge in full power and to actually win a major systemic change. We want to lay the basis, we want to lay the context of the crises that we're now facing in this discussion. And so we're going to explore further 3 areas from the People's Action video, which you didn't see, but you can eventually see, of how we can turn crisis into opportunity. And I'm going to turn now, I believe, James, you're on.
Great. Thank you, Travin. So yeah, these are we thought these 3 sections, the kind of big buckets of ways we show up in moments of crisis we wanted to talk about. So the first is, you know, go bold. You know, in moments of crisis, it is more possible to advance bold demands for structural reform than it is in normal times. You know, in fact, has been said, in many ways, bold demands often seem to make a whole lot more sense than incremental reforms at times of crisis. Travin had mentioned earlier Naomi Klein's book, Shock Doctrine. It's a fantastic book if you haven't read it. But the video that we sent around, you might have seen in the background materials, the coronavirus capitalism video, that she really kind of uses the notion of disaster capitalism, and how, on the other side, we can seize the existential crisis of climate change to transform our failed economic system into something radically better. She worked with Sunrise and AOC and others, to call for a Green New Deal in 2018. And, we can, go, I think, to the next slide, Franzi. This is basically how Rights and Democracy is actually working on this with the push for Renew New England. Sorry, my son's asking to open something. And so, we can click on here, to our partners. Many of you probably came on the June 30th launch when we launched Renew New England with this vision of a Green New Deal. Started with a Green New Deal, and then as the pandemic opened up, we then were thinking about pivoting around a pandemic New Deal, a recovery New Deal, and then with the movement for Black Lives, how can this be an opportunity for a broad, just transition to an equitable society? Franzi, I think, is bringing back the slides here. And yeah, so this is, we just wanted, if you haven't been to the Renew website, we have all the partners on there, and you can check out there for the policy framework that Kate and our team was helping develop around the region, and then we have one for each state. But yeah, if we want to go to the next slide, one of the pieces we wanted to highlight is in our work right now, all of the candidates that we've been endorsing and fighting for have signed on to this Renew framework. So Franzi picks out, there's somebody that would be willing to read this statement when it comes on. Any volunteers to read this candidates commit vision statement?
I will.
Okay, please go ahead.
Go bold, renew. Let me see, I just have to move this over a little bit. Green New Deal candidates commit to working to rebuild and renew our state by developing thriving, equitable, and sustainable local economies that center the priorities of workers and frontline communities and create good-paying unionized jobs. 2, building a zero-carbon energy sector by 2030 and zero-carbon building and transportation sectors by 2040. And 3, enacting reforms that make government more inclusive of and accountable to the communities it serves.
So, so I just want to, a good example around how, at this moment we are trying to go bold and bring this whole transformative agenda and build a political commitment around it in the 2020 election. And as we see here, nearly 200 candidates from across the region, including well over 100 just from Vermont and New Hampshire, have signed on to this vision. So great opportunity to bring this into the 2021 session after we have great results in the 2020 election. But we can go to the next slide. So, just thinking about how many ideas that were not seeming possible just in the beginning of this year, that have, actually been part of real policies that have changed, from eviction moratorium and rent cancellation, this notion of universal basic income, these payments that have gone out to everybody during this economic crisis, the policies of defunding the police and actually charging cops who kill people with murder. That's that's a new thing because of the crisis that we're in right now. If anyone has any other bold policy ideas that you want to add, just add ideas to the chat. But just the notion of some of the policies that are in the mix right now that not too long ago seemed unrealistic, and that's what we wanted to lift up here, is how in these moments things that we were working on that were unrealistic before all of a sudden seemed very reasonable solutions to the crisis. We can go to the next slide. So, this is, as we see, these confusing moments that we're in, they're confusing part because they're filled with both danger and opportunity. And as our democracy is threatened, we're going to think about how we go on the offensive to protect it and to expand it and to expand our rights as we're fighting to protect them. And when we find these openings to fight to win, these basic survival mechanisms that can allow us to plant the seeds for bolder demands that will take time to win. So, one of the questions that we ask ourselves is, can we fight for relief measures that contain within them the possibilities for permanent shifts? Can we push for buyouts and not just bailouts, so that we're getting an equity in our public goods as we, create change. So, that it's fantastic, for instance, that, in Vermont, we were able to help support efforts to get some hazard pay for essential workers. That's hugely important for them and their families. But how can we, get just cause employment or right to organize policies for essential workers in these periods? So it's structural changes that will that will move forward with the crisis. As we are working to making unemployment insurance expansion permanent. So, now that we're not fighting to just doing it in the short term, but to expand it to immigrant integration in the UI system. Enrolling newly unemployed folks in Medicare as a stepping stone towards Medicare for all. And obviously the green stimulus, once the healthcare crisis eases, so we can advance a Green New Deal that is part of an economic rebuilding. And as Traven was saying, with the state budgets cuts coming, we will likely face proposals to radically cut the very programs that we are working now to expand. So we need to find a way to use what is likely to be a series of defensive battles to lay the groundwork for whole new paradigms, rethinking the role of government. How can we start having a big conversation about taxing the wealthy and a millionaire's tax and wealth tax to go after corporations' profits under COVID with all the economic crisis that we're in. The call to defund the police is gaining traction around the country, from Minnesota to Los Angeles to New York, and right here in Vermont. And I'd love to hear in the chat ideas of cities and towns that you've heard about, just talking about these related issues. I know we have Soraya Hightower on the call from our Rights and Democracy Institute board as city councilor in Burlington, who's been part of leading the push in Burlington. Another board member on the Rights and Democracy Project board, Teddy Wazawek, is in Barrie. He's been pushing for policies like this. The things that were just months ago unthought of, or had been talked about in Burlington. Another Rights and Democracy person, Perry Freeman, city councilor, advanced these ideas a couple years ago, and was laughed at by many. And now some of the most boldest policies in the country are passing in Burlington and being advanced in Burlington at this moment. So, one of the questions we're asking, and you can, put ideas in the chat, is, how do we advance these big, bold policies, from everything from defunding the police to calling for reparations, and link these fights to funding public goods as we decarbonize the economy. These are the kind of big, bold ideas we're going to be exploring more in the breakouts. And now I guess we, go to the next slide. We talk about building a bigger we. In moments of these crises, we're really looking at, how do we bring people into our organizations and organize, and how do we have campaigns that build alliances that reach broader sections of society. So when we say building a bigger we, we're not just talking about building a bigger rights and democracy and a bigger membership, but also building bigger coalitions that have partner organizations that are also building, and we're building together to build a big united front to create change together. So let's explore those questions in the breakouts. And next slide. And and again, making meaning of this moments in the crisis that we're in, as we work to change the narrative in our communities and in our organizations, so we have a deeper understanding of where we're headed together, in these moments. So yeah, we can move to the next slide. So this is some of you might be familiar with this. We've used this in other trainings. We used this actually in part at the last strategy retreat. But this is the idea of the dominant narrative of kind of what we're up against with the political establishment. We have this kind of triangle of individualism, anti-government sentiments, of government is bad and drown it in a bathtub if we could, and then free market competition and economy being everything that we're working towards. And it's all brought together with racism. It's all held together and advanced through racism. And one of the other books, readings that we sent out as materials is Ian Haney Lopez's work on dog whistle politics, and his new book, Merge Left, that really talks about how they've used coded language to be able to divide folks, but also advance their policies, from everything from, their use of racialized, welfare queens as a way to delegitimize public good in social programs. And so when we look at our narrative, what we need to do to counter what they're saying, we're looking at a different opposite triangle, interdependence, community and care, government, and an economy for the common good. And so we have to do the opposite of what they're doing. So this is where, where we talk about collective liberation and the movement for Black lives, that where we're trying to do this work together to advance this notion of cross-racial solidarity. One of the things that in the readings that Haney Lopez says, in his book around Merge Left, Fusing Race and Class, Winning Elections and Saving America, was that he maintains that for every bold progressive vision that we're talking about, everything that we need to win, we need to start by building cross-racial solidarity first. And we've been starting to do that work in New Hampshire right now with the folks that have been working on our Deep Canvas program, which is using this race-class narrative that has found that it's the strongest way to build support, to move folks from supporting the Trump agenda to supporting our agenda. And one of the fascinating things that he raises in his book is that the same people that are often moved by this dominant narrative, they share our values, and so if we can get to them around the values around interdependence, community, and care, and having a government and an economy for the common good, we can bring them onto our side so that they might be able to be, moved by their narrative, but we can bring them back on our side. So we can go to the next slide. And so yeah, this is, one thing that has been amazing in this moment is we think about the moment we're in. These are pictures from local rallies that have happened. The amount of Black Lives Matter rallies that have happened in every corner of the state, of both states, in some towns for the first time, has been incredible. And seeing how this is a New York Times article, where Black Lives Matter public opinion has completely changed in a very short period of time. Majority of people are against it, and now it's skyrocketing. We can go to the next slide. So that's how we are working through these different areas. And I'll turn it over to Kristen, who's going to get us prepared for the breakouts. Kristen, are you there?
Oh, shoot. Okay.
There you are.
Now I'm here. Okay. Yes, I just wanted to say thank you, James. Thank you, Traven. That was a fast trot through a lot of material. I want to recommend that everyone who hasn't had a chance to look at the People's Action video all the way through and hasn't had a chance to look at those other materials that both of them have mentioned, it's really worth doing. So we're getting close to being able to move into our breakout sessions, but just to summarize some of the main points that we hope you can walk away with and into those sessions with is, first of all, how do we turn crisis into opportunity? We believe that we need to be nimble in when a crisis hits, in responding, if necessary, to change and to change the way we work. Moments of social crisis open up opportunities to advance deeply transformational change more than would be possible in normal times. And moments of crisis present both grave dangers, and we should not forget that, but also great opportunities. So we want to not let our concern about the possible dangers keep us from making and taking courageous, transformative action. We want to be aware of the material crises, like financial crises, natural disasters, pandemics, police murder, that can lead to crises of legitimacy for the established order, give us some of our opportunities, even as they are traumatic for so many people. So our strategic pivots, we've been talking about going bold, building power toward from building a bigger we and making meaning. So stepping into a moment of crisis or moments of crisis like those we have now, that's both a question of orientation, recognizing openings as well as dangers, and a question of preparation, which means working from a clear foundation of organizational power, being open to multiple and sometimes alternative ideas, and being willing to make radical demands. So if we can go to the next slide. We'd like to go into breakout sessions. And I think it'd be great if we could be in, Franzi, if we can start thinking about 4 breakout groups. And let me just pause for a minute. Katie Allen stepped up and said she would be happy to be a note taker, and Tom Proctor offered to facilitate. Is there anyone else who would like either to take notes or to facilitate? It'd be great if we had a couple more people. Lynn, okay, Lynn is a note taker. Anyone else?
I can facilitate. This is Jody.
Jody, okay.
I can take notes also.
And who's that?
This is Michaela.
Michaela, great, okay. So let's make sure if we can have that, Franzi, if you've got those folks kind of ready to move into separate sessions, then great. Then we'll just quickly go through some of the questions that we would like you to consider over the next 30 minutes together. And these are only some of the questions. These are just some start for ideas, but we hope that you'll also bring into your group some of your own questions. And feel free to move both into specifics, but also to think very broadly. So in terms of going bold, we would love for you to consider, what bold demands can RAD advance? Can we advance in our work? How can we utilize direct action in going bold? And how do we connect the immediate relief that we have been so familiar with over the last couple of months and the needs that are so tremendous with, how do we connect them with long-term, bold, and often structural reforms? Okay, and then in terms of building a bigger we, so if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, there we go. So here it's who can we connect with? How do we broaden the alliances and allies that we may not currently be working with? Are there organizations or groups that had previously seemed distant or even antagonistic to us in our work? And are there ways that we may want to consider in this moment working with them? Who are we missing when we think about who we connect with? What does it mean to build broader alignment? And then for all the people who are perhaps newly engaged and newly active, how do we keep them engaged in our work? And how do we build layers of engagement that reflect and intersecting issues we face? Okay, next slide. Got a lot of questions. Then the third area is about meaning. And so here is, this is what are the narratives that we use when we speak to ourselves, among ourselves? What narratives are we using when we reach out to other people? How effective do we think they are? Do we need to change or adapt these moments? And then how can we use these narratives and how we think about the stories we tell to advance our deeper narratives and deeper goals? So, and these, I hope will, you take them into the work that we're doing and come out in 30 minutes time and share them with the broader group. And we'll ask that the note takers then will want to continue to use draw on the lists of ideas that we have in the sessions that we'll be going on to after this one. Any questions before we start moving into breakout sessions? Good question about, so Kate had a question about how we access these questions while we're in breakouts. That's a good question. Franzi, can I ask you to back up, and maybe someone in each group can make sure that they have a photo that they share out in the session? Or Franzi, do you have another way of?
I was gonna say I could drop them into the chat. Would that be helpful?
Definitely,
yeah.
if everyone could see the chat.
Yeah, let's do that then. And let us know if that's not working.
Okay. Hopefully no more technical difficulties. Okay.
Yeah, one thing we can say is we're not shooting for perfection in the work we're doing now, and we're clearly modeling that as we in today's session.
Okay, so are we ready for breakouts?
Yep.
Okay.
I want to get you right, Brandon, but not Brandon. Who was taking notes? Yes, thank you. So we are going to move into our report back moments, and we have about 20 minutes, I think, before we want to start kind of talk, Fonzie.
Yeah, so
yeah. So would someone like to start out? And let's report, why don't you, the note taker with maybe assistance from the facilitator, just speak out some of the things that really struck your group, the things that you think the rest of the group might like to hear.
I volunteer as tribute.
Okay, there's Brandon for me.
All right. Yeah, so in terms of what narratives we're using, scripts have been adjusted for COVID. It shows that we actually care about people. We check in, see how you're doing, and people feel a certain connection to that, and that we are authentic. Isaac said that the virtual component has made it easier for some people to connect when they don't have to physically be with us. And I think that kind of makes it easier for like a working class person who gets out at 5 o'clock to be able to jump on a Zoom meeting at 5:30. And then Bonnie, who is running her own campaign, has mentioned, a huge difference between the last time that she ran. And, it's a lot of online meetings. Sometimes they are conflicting themes or conflicting times. Most of them are recorded, thankfully. So sometimes she can just get back what she missed. More phone calling, less canvassing. The canvassing that is involved, involves yard signs. And relying on personal connections more than ever is super, super important. I don't know, is there anything that I might have missed there, Amanda, or anything I misrepresented?
No, I think you did a wonderful job. And then we just went around and talked about like what opportunities this crisis presents for us as organizers and what sort of silver lining we can see in it. And I think we all really expressed the notion that this is a time where people are being politically active because they know that change needs to happen now more than ever. So we have more involvement opportunity than we ever have. So that's like a really great silver lining for us as, an activist organization.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, LeMay, I think you did a wonderful job. Thank you so much for summarizing.
Well, thank you. And then the second question is, how can we use this moment to advance deeper narratives? I think Kate Logan said, at least how I interpreted it was that bold narratives seem more reasonable. For instance, what we've seen with Black Lives Matter. A crisis really makes us and people more critical of the structures that we interact with. And it's highly, and this entire pandemic, economic crash, and then just other events too have highlighted the economic and social inequalities that our more marginalized people, are facing. So, we've been able to turn this into hopefully real change from there. I don't know, does that seem right, Amanda? Okay, great.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, either we didn't spend long on this topic or I took horrible notes. So a third question we went over was how do we keep people engaged? And Bonnie has mentioned that, maybe there are some candidates that still aren't aware that RAD even exists yet. And these might be good people that could really benefit from our support. And really, I think the best remedy for this is us to keep growing, keep engaging, and just to keep pushing on. And so I personally said that, you know, we can keep people engaged by identifying the problems that people have, but also not just bumming them out, but giving them real action. So we talk about people losing their health care through no fault of their own by losing their jobs during a pandemic. This can highlight to people like, hey, there's something really wrong with our system and it's really unsustainable. Actually, Margaret, who's in our group, is a healthcare provider, you know, said the same thing, probably more eloquently than I did. So I'm sorry if I'm not doing you justice right there. But I thought it was interesting to have the perspective of a healthcare provider, somebody that, you know, is really on the ground to share that perspective. And then finally, you know, Bonnie got cut off in the middle of a good speech right there. But another thing is we can connect people on certain issues. So for instance, when we highlight the need for like a Medicare for all, and we can get people behind that, Bonnie said basically it's kind of like a gateway into saying like, hey, you like Medicare for all, and you know, you think maybe your boss is taking advantage of you. You know, RAD is a great organization for you. You should come check us out.
I think that was a really well-rounded summary. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. I think that's about it. And the Sunny Baltimore group wants to add in.
Shall we have another, can we have another group offer to share some of what your responses were?
Lynn, you're muted, but I nominate Lynn.
I was the note taker, so when you hit the temporary unmute, it goes to the Google Doc and not to Zoom for some reason. So we had a great discussion, got to two subtopics under the Going Bold category. So looking at ideas and what issues we felt should be addressed, we started with Medicare for all, leading into the connection between the healthcare crisis and the economic impact that inadequate healthcare coverage has, which is also tied to livable wages, ending homelessness, food insecurity, poverty. We talked about reparations, demilitarization in terms of not only the military, homeland security, police, torture tactics. We talked about immigration rights, better treatment for immigrants, healthcare, and testing, especially during the pandemic. Someone noted that we tend to vilify people for circumstances beyond their control, and that this is a common thread of all of these items. And then the corporatization of education and how that ties into childcare. So those were the issues. And then when looking at what were some ideas for action, it was noted that we are coming near to the 200,000 mark of people who have died or will have died from the pandemic. At this rate right now, we're at 10,000 deaths a week. In connection to the topics that we were talking about healthcare, is that long-term hospitalization, you know, you're unemployed, certainly when you're in the hospital, it affects your income. And that is, this has really brought the healthcare crisis to an end. Somebody noted that one of the nurses associations had, when the 88 nurses had died, there was a display of 88 shoes just to see what that number looked like. What could we do with the 200,000 mark? So a couple of ideas, and please expand on them, my group. There was, something with chopsticks. Could we put something with chopsticks? 200,000 maybe nails, signifying nails in a coffin, maybe a die-in at a local hospital, maybe some sort of little masks or pictures or something like that to make the connection between if we were masking more, we may not be at this point. So that was the whole like marking the upcoming milestone around COVID. A second action was examining local budgets in terms of how much money is going to the police and advocating that those monies be reallocated to first responder mental health issues. Yeah, I think that was it for our actions. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you got it. I will just say, I don't know if you mentioned that, like we kind of like started off with, we have to address the sins of this country because it was founded on white supremacy, and therefore addressing anything can't be done unless we talk about what we've done as a country to the indigenous population and stealing people from a whole continent that they belong to and bringing them here for forced labor, and we never addressed that. So like we absolutely have to address that to move in any of the issues, which includes reparation and working on the shit that's still happening.
I will move that over to the reparations section.
Okay, should we move on to our third group? Another group?
I can report.
Great.
So in our group, on the first question on the Going Bold section, Tom shared that Andrew Yang's idea was sort of in the public consciousness and got pulled forward towards advancing a basic income, like represented in the 1,200 that we each received in the mail. And there's a question about how to bring this forward and make it into long-term reform. Scott spoke about the Renew New England and the Thrive agendas and how those have already done a really good job of creating structure and language that is bridging nationally. And then Tom responded asking, how can we really create something structural and long-term from that? Anne spoke about the housing crisis and how it became clear that once the motivation was there, a lot of people were given shelter. Once it was determined that we need to get people off the streets, the government did pivot to get people housed. And so how can we make this permanent? Zoraya spoke about Medicare for all, realizing that when we're dealing with communicable diseases, even more centrist mindsets realize that it affects everyone and that there was a push to recognize the need for everyone to receive medical care. Scott spoke about the state budget crisis, that it's clear in this time of crisis that social service needs are growing dramatically, and that it made sense to scale back on funding criminal justice. And then Scott spoke also about the COVID crisis, how it's struck in prisons, which is criminal in a whole different way, that making profit off of prisoners is criminal in a whole different way, and that it shows the lack of infrastructure in rural areas. This also brought up the idea of childcare, that we see the true necessity of childcare and the chaos that this creates at schools, and that will soon be created at schools, and that there wasn't enough quality childcare before, and that the current administration is sort of going in the wrong direction with this, and that we need to advocate for publicly supported childcare. I made the observation of how, like, during COVID, driving was reduced significantly, and how, like, our habits have changed, and like there's this window of opportunity to sort of make a change in our habits, and how could we like create like a long-term desire to change our habits in that way. And Zoraya agreed and said that that also applies to flying as well. And then there was a final point about demanding livable wages, and that it's become obvious that frontline workers are value creators. And then in the next section, Building a Bigger We, Scott had read a lot of social science research that shows the reason for Trump's victory was a split at the class level. And so, like, most critically, we need to address the working class. Like, this is a part of how we're going to build a bigger we, is by like bridging that gap. And like making the observation that probably most of us in the leadership at this organization are college educated, and how that gap isn't necessarily bridged. The people that we're working for, the working class that we want to represent, like, aren't necessarily represented in the leadership here. He said he doesn't know exactly what this means or how we go about it, but that's obviously an important thing to think about. And then Travin added that people who engage with RAD are often people who are able to work from home, and folks who are most impacted are the unemployed people, or people who will be unemployed. And so sort of how we need to build power amongst that group of people, the unemployed who aren't typically politically active, but since we're coming up against a long-term problem for unemployment, we need to look at that. Scott adds this point about our language, that there's a lot of like multisyllabic progressive verbiage, almost like left-wing dog whistles that don't always communicate our real emotions, or could push people away that we need to build alliances with. And Anne made a great point about this connection with technology, and that there's like people there's kind of a paralysis happening amongst people who are either like really eager to just make their lives completely online, but like not stepping into like the direct action. And I hope I'm not misrepresenting anyone, but this is what I got. Yeah, so, and that there's a way that mutual aid, oh yeah, I love this point, that like mutual aid networks, we can expand on those, because there's been so much mutual aid being built. So how can we like expand on them, capitalize on that? And then finally, we just had a brief moment to look at the making meaning section. And we talked about our need to change the way that we're using language, and that like we really need to focus on narratives of care, who is taking care of who. Also, there's a narrative of no fault that Zaraya brought up, that like we're very interconnected, and that there's not necessarily a specific fault. And finally, that the narrative of compassion is necessary, and it might be an important way to address what is lacking in the Trump administration, is this lack of compassion, and that a wide swath of people would respond to this narrative on compassion. So I might have just talked for forever, but that's our summary.
That's great. Thank you. I think we have one more group to report back.
Hi, James, did you want me to overview the notes?
Please, yes, Michaela.
Cool. So I've been reading through, trying to find the highlights here. I'm not sure if we got through all the questions, but we did have a good discussion. We started talking about, you know, like being grounded, the idea that like people are more involved when they're like grounded in your own role and responsibility in the issue. I guess Lauren saw that happen with a food program she was running back in the spring. You know, Jim was talking about how, you know, how we can get our messages out more effectively and readily with like, you know, a multimedia group or something. So thus there was a discussion of TikTok, which is valid. You know, Jubilee was mentioning like, how can we use our stories? How can we use people's stories and help people use their stories while, you know, making sure we're respecting them, which is always an important thing to bring up in those conversations. Probably the best quote was Mark saying reality is endorsing us. Erica, in the short term, we should look at underfilled political offices in New Hampshire, like 7 out of 10 county attorney offices are uncontested, and we should be filling those seats in others. James was like, yeah, for sure. An issue that we have is a lot of times the people that we really want to be involved, you know, the ones that are marginalized are often the ones that are like working the hardest, and so like don't have always like the time to come to the events, and so it's like, how can we get them? And I think that's where we started talking about, oh, and Mia mentioned that like in Bennington, they can't even, like before getting people involved, I guess they're still trying to get people to like vote, because I guess a lot of people aren't voting there. Mia was saying that like if Mia were to run for office, I don't remember Mia's pronouns, but like Mia, like the people that are voting wouldn't vote for Mia, but the people that aren't voting would vote for Mia. And so like they're starting at that point there in Bennington. I don't know if I'm going on too long. I was going based on how long Katie went. One of the challenges, no, I already said that part. Then we sort of talked about like ways to bring the community together, like, you know, some sort of socializing group, like, you know, perhaps having food, or I guess someone's got a mobile pizza oven. And like perhaps that's a way to sort of casually bring folks together while we get to talk about these issues and sort of build out our support. And something I wanted to say but didn't get a chance to is like youth involvement. Like, you know, there are youths that look for things to do. Some of them are looking for things to do because they care. Some of them are looking for things to do because they want to build their college resume, like I was when I was younger in high school. But I think having a program where folks like high school and middle school students can be involved, but is welcoming to like someone who doesn't feel like they're an overachiever, but also to the overachievers, would be like a cool way to bring people in. I know that like I tried to sign up some youths that I know for some groups, and some of them liked them, but some of them were like, I feel like I'm not an overachiever enough, and like all these people are like way ahead of me. And I was like, that sucks. And like, I don't know if that really was the case, but like keeping that in mind. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Michaela. Thank you, everyone who reported back. I need to ask James, do you want to talk about what our next steps are, and talk about what we'll be doing with some of this material that we have and our next sessions?
Sure. Thanks, everybody. And I love reading the chat and everything that people were adding in the chat also to these great report backs and the great discussions, you know, we had. And I wanted to highlight one idea that Allison put here in case you didn't see it in the chat around, you know, just how important relational organizing is, you know, just the human relationship bonds that we're building. You know, one of the biggest challenges, I think, for us as an organization, you know, I think as folks said, you know, it's many ways great. We've gotten great turnout and participation through Zoom because it is a lot easier for many of us who have families and multiple jobs and so on to participate than traveling and trying to figure out how to, you know, make dinner for your family and still make a meeting and so on. But the piece that really it makes it hard, and I just wanted to underline this, is it's really unfortunate that we didn't get a chance to be in the same place together, because you know, as Allison said, you know, we come for the ideas, we come for the issues, but we really stay as part of this organization because of the people and the bonds we built with each other. So I for one, and I think can speak for a lot of people, we're very excited for when we are able to do this, hopefully next summer in person and spend, you know, a couple days together so we can really build this analysis together. So we have this clarity together, but also the relationships, because, you know, this is a long, you know, we're an organization that is not trying to win just in the short term, but really, you know, this is a long haul fight that we have, and we're going to have to be doing this for a long time together. So really appreciate folks that have, you know, made the time to participate in this. And then we have these two next sessions for sure, and hopefully a third date that we come about how we build conversations together. But the ones that we have on the books are building off of the conversations we had tonight. We'll be digging into our analysis around collective liberation and how, as we highlighted today, how that is central. As Esma was saying, you know, like we have to have that at the root of the work that we're doing because of the legacy of this country. And as we see, you know, how our opponents use racism and racial tension as a way to dividing us and advancing their agenda. So how do we use anti-racism and collective liberation to advance our movement that really is tapping into the values that everyone in our communities share. So right now, right now we are not doing something on the 24th. There was an early message that went out 24th. The next session is on the 29th, which is a Saturday, from 9:30 to 1 p.m., where we're going to have two sessions. So tonight we just did one session. We're going to do two, one on collective liberation, and the second on the theory of change of the organization. And so that is our, kind of next steps in making meaning together. And then on September 12th, we're going to have a little bit of a break, in part because the New Hampshire primary and all the work that's going to be going on there. We're going to have a break and then dive into, looking back and reaching back and looking forward. This idea of looking at where we've gone 5 years and then where we want to go in the next 5 years, really our organizing model and how we're building as an organization. And then also digging into this just transition, in particular, this work we touched on today with Renew, and then also looking at particularly the 2020 election. So many people between this crisis and these rallies that have been happening for racial justice and around the pandemic, and then this historic election, are getting involved in the first time. And so we're going to be brainstorming together in that piece about how do we absorb folks into this movement so that folks that got involved in this election stay involved to actually fighting for and building a democracy. So that's that last section. We're going to try to share out all the notes from all of these sessions, and then basically the takeaway, all the great ideas that come up in these breakouts, and we're really going to do our best to have it inform our strategic plan that we're going to be working to bring forward at our membership assembly on December 5th. So as we look at getting ready for 2021 and really the next 5 years ahead, so we're harvesting lessons and ideas together that will hopefully be able to culminate in a great plan that we'll bring forward. So if anyone has any questions or ideas after this, feel free to email me or anyone that you typically work with in the organization. And please email the notes to my email or Franzi's or Kristen's, and we'll be able to bring those together. If you have any questions, we are going to be recording all of the sessions and be able to make those available as well. Thank you so much, for participating, and I would love to have ideas also for the future sessions of materials and background reading and things to use. And there, as you see, there's a number of roles coming up. So if you're interested in helping plug into the future sessions, this making meaning together and analysis together is a big part of our work that we're going to want to do together moving forward. So really appreciate Kristen, Trav, and Franzi for helping pull together, and people who stepped up to help facilitate and take notes in the breakouts, and all of you for helping build this event together. So thank you so much. Look forward to working with you moving forward.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.